She had been watching them for years, watching them come through her door, watching them disrupt every scene, watching them steal every laugh in the room. And one day, finally, she said something she had never said publicly before. She said they were not just funny. She said they were the best thing that ever happened to that show. Those words came from Penny Marshall. And the men she was talking about were Michael McKean and David Lander, the two actors behind the characters of Lenny and Squiggy on Laverne and Shirley, the greasy upstairs neighbors who became one of the most beloved comedy double acts in the history of American television. And the full story of what happened between those four people, what was said behind closed doors, what was hidden for years, and what was only revealed after most of them were gone, is more powerful and more moving than anything that ever made it onto the screen. For anyone who needs a reminder, Laverne and Shirley was one of the biggest television shows in American history. It ran on ABC from January 1976 to May 1983, 8 seasons, 178 episodes, and at the height of its popularity, it was the single most watched television show in the entire country. Not just on its night, not just in its time slot, the most watched show in America. In the 1977 to 1978 season, and again in 1978 to 1979, nothing on television drew more viewers. It was built on the chemistry of two women. Penny Marshall played Laverne DeFazio, loud, defensive, sharp, wearing a cursive L on every sweater she owned. Cindy Williams played Shirley Feeney, prim, romantic, optimistic, the straight to Laverne is wild card. Together they were electric. The show opened with the two of them high-stepping arm in arm down a Milwaukee street chanting Schlemiel, Schlemazel, Hasenpfeffer Incorporated. And that opening alone became one of the most recognized images in American pop culture. Penny Marshall was born Carol Penelope Marshall on October 15, 1943 in the Bronx, New York. Her brother was Gary Marshall, the creator of Happy Days and one of the most successful television producers in the history of the medium. Growing up in the shadow of a brilliantly funny family in the Bronx gave Penny both her comedic instincts and her inferiority complex, a combination that would define her for the rest of her life. Cindy Williams was born on August 22, 1947 in Van Nuys, California. Before Laverne and Shirley, she was already a film actress of serious standing. She had appeared in George Lucas's American Graffiti in 1973, one of the most acclaimed films of that decade, and in Francis Ford Coppola's Best Picture nominated The Conversation in 1974. She was not a television comedian looking for her break. She was a respected film actress who stepped into what seemed like a modest television assignment and ended up trapped, pleasantly, lucratively, and sometimes frustratingly, inside the most successful show on television for 6 years. The show was born almost by accident. In November 1975, Gary Marshall cast Penny and Cindy as a pair of wisecracking brewery workers for a single episode of Happy Days, Dates for Fonzie and Richie. The studio audience responded so loudly and so warmly that ABC commissioned a full series before the episode had even aired. Laverne and Shirley premiered on January 27, 1976, and debuted at number 1. It never really looked back. But the show that looked like pure, uncomplicated fun from the outside was, from very early on, something considerably more complicated from the inside. Cindy Williams felt from almost the beginning that Shirley was being sidelined, that the show was tilting toward Laverne, toward Penny, and that her character was being slowly reduced to a supporting role in what was supposed to be an equal partnership. She said so publicly in a 1977 interview with TV Guide. She said Marshall's character was getting most of the attention. For a woman who had been in American Graffiti and The Conversation, who had turned down other opportunities to be here, that imbalance stung in a way it never entirely stopped stinging. And in the middle of all of that tension, through all those years of pressure and perceived imbalance and the relentless weight of being number 1, there were Lenny and Squiggy, crashing through the door, stealing every scene, and holding the whole thing together in ways that nobody fully understood until much later. Michael McKean and David Lander did not audition for Laverne and Shirley. They were invited to a party. Penny Marshall invited them. The show needed additional characters for the pilot. The 2 apartment floors needed to feel lived in. The girls needed neighbors. And Penny had seen McKean and Lander perform their Lenny and Squiggy characters as part of a comedy ensemble in Los Angeles and thought they might fit. She brought them to a party where the show's producers would be present. She told them to perform. They did. And the producers, who had come intending to hire them as writers, immediately understood that these 2 men needed to be in front of the camera. Michael McKean and David Lander had met as students at Carnegie Mellon University and had been developing the characters of Lenny and Squiggy together for years before the show existed. The characters were built on a specific chemistry between the 2 men, a rhythm of interruption, of misunderstanding, of one always slightly more confused than the other, that only works when 2 people have spent years learning to breathe together comedically. And it worked. From their very first episode, Lenny and Squiggy were a phenomenon. Their entrance became one of the most beloved running gags in television history, always arriving at the exact moment Laverne or Shirley had said something they absolutely should not have overheard, always announcing themselves with Squiggy's high-pitched hello, always managing to make the situation simultaneously worse and more entertaining than it had been 30 seconds before. The audience loved them. The network loved them. And privately, though she would not fully say so publicly for years, Penny Marshall loved them too. But there was something happening behind the scenes that nobody in the audience knew about. And it would not become public for a very long time. In 1984, while the show was still fresh in the public memory, while Lenny and Squiggy were still household names, David Lander was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. He was 37 years old. He was at the top of his career. And he told nobody, not his co-stars, not his friends in the industry, not the press. He managed his symptoms privately, continued working, and carried the diagnosis alone for 15 years while the world around him had no idea. He wrote about it in his 2002 autobiography called Fall Down Laughing, how Squiggy caught multiple sclerosis and did not tell nobody. He described the daily reality of managing a progressive neurological disease while performing, while showing up and being funny on command. He described the fear of what would happen if the industry found out, the roles that would stop coming, the perception that he was no longer reliable. He finally went public in 1999. 15 years of silence. And when he did speak, he did not do it quietly. He became a goodwill ambassador for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. He spoke at conferences. He used every platform available to him to make sure that people living with MS felt less alone than he had felt for 15 years in the middle of one of the most watched television studios in America. Cindy Williams was one of the first people from the show to publicly address what David had been carrying. She said she had known something was wrong, that she had seen things on set that made her wonder, that she had wanted to ask but did not know how. When the diagnosis became public, she expressed something that went beyond sympathy. She expressed a kind of grief for the years he had spent alone with it. Penny Marshall said simply that he had been braver than anyone knew, that what he had done, continuing to show up, continuing to perform, continuing to be Squiggy for an audience that had no idea, was one of the most extraordinary things she had witnessed in her years in the business. And Michael McKean said something that cut through everything else. He said David Lander was the funniest man he had ever known, that nothing upstairs deteriorated, that he was as funny as he had always been until the very end. He was talking about a man who by the end could no longer walk, who performed his entire career with a disease eating through his nervous system, who chose to fall down laughing rather than stop getting up. David Lander died on December 4, 2020 at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 73 years old. He had battled multiple sclerosis for 37 years. His wife Kathy was beside him. So were his daughter and son-in-law. She said afterward it was very peaceful. He had a tough battle with MS for 37 years, and he persevered like no one she had ever seen, and that it had taught her a great deal about the important things of life. Michael McKean posted a photograph of the two of them from their early days together. He wrote, "He was my oldest friend. We knew this was coming for a while. We watched his physical deterioration, but nothing upstairs deteriorated. He was as funny as he always was until the end. He was the funniest man I ever knew." Cindy Williams, who by December 2020 had already lost Penny Marshall to diabetes complications 2 years earlier, posted her own tribute. She said she was still processing the deaths of her co-stars, that the losses were coming too fast, that the family she had built on that set, the family she had sometimes resented and always loved, was disappearing. She was right. The losses had been coming steadily, and they were not finished. Penny Marshall had died on December 17, 2018 at her home in the Hollywood Hills. She was 75 years old. The cause was cardiopulmonary failure, cardiac arrest, and complications from diabetes. She had been diagnosed with lung cancer in 2010, cancer that had spread to her brain, but had somehow recovered. She directed films afterward. She showed up. She kept going. And then in December 2018 she was simply gone. The woman who had put the cursive L on her sweater and turned herself from a Bronx girl into a Hollywood legend, and then into something even rarer, a Hollywood director who made films that mattered. Big Awakenings, A League of Their Own, which became the first film directed by a woman to gross more than $100 million at the box office. She did it all and then went home to the Hollywood Hills and did not wake up. And then in November 2021, Eddie Mecca, who had played Carmine Ragusa, Shirley's big-hearted singing boyfriend, died at his home in Newhall, California. He was 69 years old. His neighbors had not heard from him in days. They called the police. He was found alone. A man who had earned a Tony nomination on Broadway, who had toured nationally in Greece with Cindy Williams, who had lit up every room he walked into with a singing voice that stopped people mid-sentence. Found alone in a quiet house in California. Cindy Williams released a statement within hours. "My darling Eddie," she wrote, "a world-class talent who could do it all. I love you dearly. I will miss you so much. But oh, the marvelous memories." 14 months later, on January 25, 2023, Cindy Williams herself was gone. She was 75 years old. She died peacefully, her family said, surrounded by her children Zach and Emily Hudson. The woman who had been Shirley Feeney, prim, romantic, full of hope and dreams and the stubborn belief that life could be better than it was the last of the 4 main women of that cast to go. As of 2026, Michael McKean is the only surviving original cast member of Laverne and Shirley. He is 78 years old. He still works. He earned an Emmy nomination for his extraordinary performance in Better Call Saul. He appeared in Spinal Tap 2 in 2025, reprising the character he first played while Laverne and Shirley was still on the air. He is still here, still showing up, still the last man standing from a cast that changed American television. What Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall revealed about Lenny and Squiggy, about Michael McKean and David Lander, was not a scandal. It was not a betrayal. It was something quieter and more devastating than that. It was the truth that the funniest man on the show had been fighting for his life the whole time nobody was looking. That the characters who made America laugh the hardest were built by 2 men who had been friends since college and stayed friends until death separated them. That the people who made the show feel like a family actually were one. And now most of them are gone. And the one who is left still makes people laugh. That is the only ending that makes any sense for a story like this.